Pope Francis appeals to leaders of Venezuela for peace after weeks of political turmoil. Yesterday at the Vatican, the Holy Father called for an end to violence and for the respect of human rights. Anti-government protests have gone on for weeks, with the country facing a deep economic crisis. Nearly 30 people have died. Pope Francis addresses the media while traveling back to Italy from Egypt. He hit a wide range of topics, from the migrant crisis in Europe to tensions in North Korea.
A pezzi, ma I pezzi sono allargati e anche si sono concentrati.
The Holy Father warned a good part of humanity will be destroyed if tensions with North Korea escalate. He called for diplomacy and help from the United Nations. Francis was also asked about a meeting with President Trump in May. The Holy Father said while no official request for a meeting has been received, he welcomes every head of state who requests an audience. While in Egypt, Pope Francis preached tolerance between Muslims and Christians and showed solidarity with the country's persecuted Coptic Christians. Francis engaged the crowd Saturday with waves and smiles as he celebrated Mass with 15,000 people outside of Cairo. During his homily, the Holy Father urged the faithful to be good and merciful to their fellow Egyptians. He says the only fanaticism believers can have is that of charity. Security was tight following a pair of bombings on Palm Sunday that killed dozens of Christians in the country. And joining us now is Professor Robert Destro, Director of the Catholic University of America's Interdisciplinary Program in Law and Religion. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Tell us how important is the Pope's visit? Was it?
Pope's visit is very important. I mean, going to Al-Azhar, which is basically the Vatican of Sunni Islam, is a wonderful opening. They have been annoyed with the papacy since Benedict's Regensburg speech. So this was a very important trip for the Pope.
He doesn't shy away from controversy now, does he?
This
Pope.
does not.
With the Coptic Orthodox Pope, Tawadros II, I think they signed a pledge saying that the faithful who switch churches don't have to be rebaptized. Why is that significant?
That's significant because it recognizes that the Copts are Christians, and that if we all read the same Bible, which we do, we know that there's a certain formula for baptism. If it's done that way, then you don't need to redo. You don't need a redo.
Right. When they were there, well, since December, 75 people have been killed. Right. And when the Pope was there, he stood with El-Sisi, President El-Sisi, and El-Sisi said, look, I am determined right now to get rid of ISIS. I stand shoulder to shoulder with you. And he says that Islam does not command the killing of the innocent. Help us understand the ideology of Egypt that perpetuates this type of violence.
Well, let me make a slight correction. It's not the ideology of Egypt. Egypt and the Christian community have had very good relations for years. It's really the Muslim Brotherhood, Salafi, Jihadi movement that's coming out of Saudi Arabia that's causing the problem. And they basically have put themselves in the place of God themselves by saying, look, the Quran says specifically you don't kill innocent people. So where does ISIS get this idea? Well, it comes from this idea in Saudi Arabia, largely coming out of the Saudi madrasas, that basically says you can kill heretics. So they go after the Shia, they go after the Yazidis, and they go after the Christians.
Sure. The Pope urged that Egypt's imams teach their students to reject violence in God's name and preach peace and work on dialogue and reconciliation, not to instigate conflict. On a practical level, how is that going to work?
Well, it's going to work if you can get into those pulpits on Friday morning. And more importantly, I would suggest that it's going to help if they stop sending their graduate students to madrasas in Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is the Indonesians have exactly the same problem. You've got this ideology that's seeping out of the Gulf states, and it's being financed by the Gulf states. So, if you can actually get to the formation, it's proper formation, just like we Catholics think.
It seems like you're putting a lot of the, shall I say, blame on Saudi Arabia. That's not something we hear very often.
No, you don't. But this is one of those unspoken things. It's when you there's a name for this. It's called It's called Salafi jihadis, and basically this is what is the ideology driving ISIS. You know, and their idea of a caliphate is to impose their own narrow view of Sharia law on everybody.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Robert Destro, Director of the Catholic University of America's Interdisciplinary Program on both law and religion.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us.